What does Star Wars mean to you? For many of us, it represents the magic of childhood, and we have George Lucas, among others, to thank for that. And it would be an understatement to say things have been a little cloudy lately. That galaxy far, far away has not felt the same under the Disney regime, and many of us have chafed under their interpretation of what the franchise should be. But there's a deeper element to the fans that's not just more vocal, but more vitriolic, more jaded, and cynical, and mean. Doubtless you know what I'm talking about. The subset that bullied Kelly Marie Tran off Twitter, that accuses Kathleen Kennedy of intentionally destroying what Lucas built, the same subset that inadvertently made the Rise of Skywalker what it ended up being. And that has led to rumors of studios forming superfan committees aimed at making sure movies don't do anything that will anger fans. Most of us are reasonable people. Chances are you are too. But the power of this subset is undeniable, and frankly, it's making it hard to enjoy what I want to enjoy. Now, there's nothing wrong with fans in general. In general, fandoms are positive. Toxic fandom can be a little tough to boil down into a neat package, and to quote Justice Potter Stewart, I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. And chances are you do too. The backlash against The Acolyte was notable, and frankly, a little weird. Negative fan reaction was shrill and unrelenting, more so than with a lot of other projects. For simplicity's sake and clarity, when I use the word fandom from here on out, I do not mean all Star Wars fans. Instead, what I mean is fan dum 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 dum. We'll address some of the more vehement complaints from the fandom that surrounded the show, like lore, wokeness, fight choreography, writing. Before we begin, let me be very clear again. I'm not against negative opinions or honest critique. You don't have to like something. You should have your own opinion, and having your own opinion contributes to the greater conversation at large. It's needed. Lord knows there's plenty of stuff out there I don't like. But what the discourse around The Acolyte showed was, in my mind, a clear cognitive disconnect among the fandom between its love of George Lucas and utter hatred of Kennedy's Lucasfilm. I believe you can form whatever opinion you want, but it has to be based around proper perspective and made in good faith. To put Lucas on a marble pedestal will only lead to disappointment. Also, wait until the end before you leave any comments. Now, first up...
Impossible. The Sith have been extinct for a millennium.
Little did we know that that one line would light such a fire a quarter of a century later when Ki-Adi-Mundi showed up in this show centered around the resurgence of the Sith. Same with Anakin being conceived by the Force. Man, that really stirred up a hornet's nest a generation later when Osha and May were teased as having unnatural origins as well. And this duel here, at the time, all we knew was it was really cool. We did not think about Anakin's lightsaber color, but we should have asked ourselves why Anakin didn't bleed his lightsaber, right? Especially considering how Osha did it so easily. Clearly, showrunner Leslie Headland had no respect for lore like George Lucas did. You may be wondering, lore, what is it good for? What makes George Lucas so great at what he does is his #1 mantra, lore. Lore never changes. Except he never said that, and he clearly never believed that. Consider J.R.R. Tolkien. That man created a history book, even multiple history textbooks you could say, to round out Lord of the Rings. Everything has a place, it's thought out, and everything is built on something else with precedent. George Lucas, on the other hand, created a painting. Did you know the Mona Lisa is not the only thing on its canvas? Leonardo da Vinci used an underdrawing when he created that. There's another image under there, perfectly fine, which he chose to build on. That's similar to Lucas's process. He's a chronic perfectionist, and he's always rearranging and layering on his work. A few examples. Obi-Wan said he was trained by Yoda, which was totally painted over in episode 1, and Lucas then spent time in the next 2 films reconciling that to make it work. Yoda trained all the kids, and he gave Obi-Wan some homework. We were given the solid impression that Owen Lars knew Ben and Anakin very well, and that it was Ben who was behind Anakin's call to adventure. Turns out, Owen barely knew Anakin, and he had never met Ben before Luke was born, and it took a Disney Plus show to kind of reconcile that. Leia said her mother died when she was very young, and remembered her in the way a small child would. Turns out her mother died in childbirth, and Leia's recollection of her was retconned, chalking it up to Force sensitivity. Never mind how Luke was right there too, and didn't get any of those vibes. And then take Jedi celibacy. That one did come out of nowhere. We take it for granted now, but it was not a thing when the prequel trilogy first started even. It was introduced in Attack of the Clones, and that changed everything we knew about the Jedi Order. It's a big change to make when you've already got 4 out of 6 movies in the can. What I'm trying to help you understand is this bit of irony. George Lucas created this world, but nothing in it is sacred to him. If his painting was sacred to him, he would not have tinkered and tampered with it over the years as much as he did. What is important to the man is the never-ending pursuit of perfection. It's something of a curse, and the previous fandom did not appreciate it. Again, just trying to drive home the point that you can't worship at the altar of Lucas and be dogmatic about what he's made, because he definitely would have changed your favorite things about the prequels by now. It's not about the painting underneath, it's about the new one on top. And I think Lucas himself has not helped things by crafting this mythos of having mapped out his entire saga in the 70s, and we just got to see each chapter as technology caught up to his vision. Frankly, he had a general idea back in the day, but he's improvised every step along the way, which is fine. That's great. This giant saga was a constant work in progress, and a great artist will edit along the way. I just wish he had been more honest about his process, because now that's how we get a dogmatic subset of the fandom in the first place. Getting back to the Acolyte, we should have an open mind when it comes to reworking this painting. But with that said, the show makes fewer changes to the lore than the prequels did. If anything, it makes expansions to it that broaden our understanding. It shows a degree of appreciation, not disdain. Ki-Adi-Mundi was very deliberately included in the show. You don't spend that kind of money and time on a makeup job like that for a meaningless cameo. As much as some folks may hate to admit it, Leslie Headland knows her stuff. She was aware of the ramifications of including him, and it was a deliberate choice. By the time the show was done, Mundi's ignorance of the Sith remained intact, and his line in The Phantom Menace would take on even greater meaning. The fandom just needed to give the show time rather than getting up in arms right off the bat, but it was really reluctant to do so. Really quick, plenty of folks got in a tizzy over Ki-Adi's age in the show, saying he should not have even been born yet. And the easy answer to that is, his age was established in Legends. It was not canon anymore, which is something those fans should have known but chose to make a stink about anyway, and that complaint, I think, was just in bad faith. Next, Osha and May seemingly being conceived by the Force. To start, the infamous 3rd episode merely hinted at something special about their birth, yet the fandom ran all the way home with it, saying Headland and company spat all over Anakin's role as the chosen one. The twins were conceived by the Force just as he was, and thereby cheapened what made him special. Again, this was rectified by just letting the show play out. The twins were created using a vergence in the Force, the planet, but they themselves were not vergences. Anakin himself was a vergence,
located around a person,
and still retains his special status. Incidentally, as far as I know, vergences in the Force were not further explored after The Phantom Menace until this show. Nobody before Headland had pulled at that thread. Vergences aren't something that mainstream viewers would remember, and it kind of flies in the face of those who said she knew nothing about Star Wars. Force vergences, Kreia, those are some kind of deep cuts. A secondary reason I wanted to hit on this point of nothing being sacred to George Lucas is because the fandom has started applying weird purity tests on select filmmakers and actors. They'll take a magnifying glass to interviews and press junket clips, typically for ammunition to use against whoever they don't like. How about this clip where Charlie Barnett misspeaks and says Anakin blew up the Death Star?
Well, Anakin just killed a whole Death Star. How many people died on that?
I get the impression that Charlie easily gets passionate about what he's talking about, especially with creative stuff, to the point where he easily misspeaks. And a ton of us are like that, and I certainly am, and that's even reading with the script. The only difference is we don't have thousands of people parsing over our every word. Maybe he was trying to refer to Luke blowing up the Death Star. Maybe he was referring to Anakin blowing up the droid control ship. Are these small mistakes indicative of a disdain for the material, a hidden agenda to ruin the franchise from the inside out? Of course not, but somehow the fandom thinks it does. What's ironic is that the fandom's Lord and Savior Harrison Ford definitely does have an active disdain for the franchise. Do you think he knows anything about the Star Wars universe beyond the lines he had to memorize? To borrow from Aaron Sorkin, I'd bet all the money in my pockets against all the money in your pockets that Harrison Ford could not even tell you the name of Luke Skywalker's dad. But it doesn't matter, because being a super fan has no correlation to being a good storyteller or a good actor. Consider this. Chris Avellone, who wrote what is possibly the greatest Star Wars character in the greatest Star Wars story to date, was not a fan at the time. He's just a good writer. Demanding that all of our writers, directors, and actors be super fans is dumb. At best, you'll just maintain the status quo because super fans don't want to explore narrative possibilities. They just want to maintain the status quo while throwing flashy fan service at you. Occasionally, you'll get a superfan who also happens to be a really good storyteller like Sam Witwer, but he's definitely more the exception rather than the rule. Alright, that may have been kind of rough. If you're still here, let's move on to the next topic.
The way he leaps off of rooftops and flips backwards to face the camera before falling into a headfirst dive is just full of the exaggerated swagger of a black teen.
Let's get this out of the way in case we need to get back on the same page. Wokeness in storytelling is bad. It tends to stifle creativity while pretending to break new ground. It shuts down honest conversation while pretending to invite discourse. It dumbs down its audience while pretending to have a lot on its mind. Wokeness in movies and TV is a thing. There are plenty of writers out there who do put more importance on who's on screen than what's happening on screen, and then dismiss any and all criticism as small-minded. To give you a glimpse into my thinking, I do think there is a conversation to be had about the flaccid corporate approach to representation we see these days, which is perfectly encapsulated by Assassin's Creed Shadows. Plenty of folks bumped on that because it felt a little patronizing and even cynical, and for all discourse about Yasuke to conversely be shot down is frustrating. And so it's understandable why a lot of the fandom carries that frustration around. Except I'm here to tell you this. Wokeness is a thing in the industry, but not nearly as much as you think, and it's not Kathleen Kennedy's problem. There's a saying out there that you shouldn't attribute to malice that which can adequately be explained by incompetence. Well, I say, never attribute to wokeness that which can adequately be explained by a lack of imagination and time. For instance, Rey was great at everything because the guys who wrote her needed her to move the plot along as fast as possible. Jecki dressed down Yord because they needed to establish both of their personalities as quickly as possible. Does Kennedy put stock in casting female leads? Yeah, but you know, women do exist, and the projects under her still vastly feature more men in them than the original and prequel trilogies featured women. So nobody's really losing here. And keep in mind that Kennedy's Lucasfilm hired 7 white guys to direct 5 films. Lucas's 6 movies only had 3. I think nowadays how we watch these movies is different. Think about this and be honest. If Attack of the Clones came out today and revealed that Boba Fett, the coolest character in Star Wars, was a person of color, would the fandom call George a woke shill? Going further, when we saw Jango get killed off, not by any of our main characters, but by Sam Jackson, how many TikToks would we see claiming Boba's dad got killed by DEI? In Revenge of the Sith, how many would hate that Mace Windu beat Palpatine, the Emperor himself? If A New Hope released today, how many in the fandom would hate Princess Leia for taking control of her own rescue? If Empire Strikes Back was released today, how would the fandom react to seeing Lando wearing Han's clothes at the end of the movie, especially considering the fact that Harrison Ford was not signed up for a third film? Replacing Han Solo with a black actor? You cannot tell me that would not have had major backlash and cries of DEI hire. There is a lot of woke to be found all around if you're looking for it. And nowadays, the algorithm has everybody looking for it because outrage gets engagement. More on that later. Bringing it back to The Acolyte, did Leslie Headland inject a gay agenda into the show? To put it bluntly, there's not a ton of gay in the show to begin with, but how does it handle what is there? I think pretty honestly. You know how Apple has this stipulation that villains can't use their phones on screen? I think there's a similar thing going on where it's kind of an unwritten rule where bad guys and creeps and fundamentally flawed characters cannot be people of color or members of the LGBT community. I'm not saying those groups should be vilified by any means, I'm just saying it's getting predictable. Mother Anastasia and Mother Coral, on the other hand, buck that trend. Lesser writers would have had the two of them be virtuous and understanding and awesome from the get-go, and their undoing would be at the hands of people who hate everything good in the world. But both parents make the mistake of being dogmatic and closed-minded and ignoring the wishes of their children. Mother Anastasia only comes around with time and a lot of introspection, and even then falls short of totally committing to letting Osha leave to join the Jedi. Coral never even reaches that. Rather than fall back on treating race or sexual orientation as a personality trait that can be substituted for honest-to-goodness character development, Headland and company try to reach deeper and give their characters more dimension, which is frustratingly rare these days. Simply put, the new regime is just about as woke as the old one was, which is to say, not crazy much. How we watch these movies has changed, and what the people involved pay lip service to has changed, but there's no hidden agenda seeping into these movies and shows. Most of it can be chalked up to a lack of creativity and time.
The first thing that Leslie said to me when I first met her is that she wanted to incorporate a lot of wuxia and kung fu and samurai flair into the action of The Acolyte.
The Acolyte got a decent amount of grief from the fandom for what they called overly staged or wonky fight choreography. I'm sorry, it seems like that's just in bad faith. I love the lightsaber duels in the prequels, but even I cannot deny that they are obscenely choreographed, more so than the Acolytes. If you're going to hold the fighting in the prequels up as the gold standard, be honest with yourself. Here, where Obi-Wan gets stuck on Darth Maul's blade somehow, that's kind of lame. Darth Maul's kick that clearly does not connect, that's kind of weak. Any of these flubs would ruin an entire film or TV show for the fandom. But as a side note, Qui-Gon's, elbow punch here just rocks. Look here, during Dooku and Yoda's fight. My guy is blindly swinging away at nothing, and not even the sound effects match up. And look here, as decent as the fight between Sheev Palpatine and 4 Jedi Masters is, we had to retcon it with a Sith scream that completely paralyzed 2 of them right off the bat. Basically, if you think lightsaber dueling in the prequels is the end-all be-all, the perfect example of what action in Star Wars should be, then nothing will ever be good enough for you, because everything that comes from this point on will have the same flaws as those, but none of the goodwill.
Starts with me sitting here doodling in my little binder, but it ends up with a couple thousand people working together in a very, very intense, emotional, creative way to pull it off. I already covered retconning and how it's a sin that Lucas was never afraid to commit, but we need to cover one more example, Sifo Dyas. Attack of the Clones is billed as a half sci-fi noir mystery, half intimate love story. Crucial to the mystery of it all is who ordered the clone army. The fact is, Sifo Dyas was originally Sido Dyas, as in Sidious, but Lucas changed it because even he thought it was too on the nose. But he didn't have an actual character to go with the name change.
He figured, we'll just come back to that later. And he couldn't fit it in Revenge of the Sith, so he gave it to James Luceno to fix in Labyrinth of Evil, only to change it again years later. It was a messy journey for plot points that was kind of crucial to Attack of the Clones' underlying mystery, and what's left is a convoluted mess that we've learned not just to accept, but to love. But regardless of that love and acceptance, it is bad writing. It just is. You can't rip out a central pillar of your mystery and toss it like an old banana peel. George Lucas is a prolific filmmaker who 1000% deserved his Lifetime Achievement Award and was robbed of an Oscar or two along the way, but he's not a master writer. Even he's admitted to not enjoying the writing process, especially dialogue, and it's plain to see, and it shows how much we're willing to do to love his stories. I did not see anything in The Acolyte that offended more than anything in the prequels. Some of the dialogue was a bit simple, or stilted, or a little dumb, but come on, it's nothing we have not seen before. In fact, most of the time I found it just fine. When you think about it, it's kind of funny to drag Star Wars anything through the mud because of the writing quality. It's never really reached the gold standard. If I haven't lost you yet, this might be where I do. Even Andor does not really hold up against other shows like Shogun, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and The Bear, and other stuff, and I will die on this hill. Let's face it, Andor is very good, but it only looks like the Tom Brady of narrative storytelling because it's sitting next to the Book of Boba Fett and Ahsoka. All that is to say, we've kind of evolved past writing quality as Star Wars lovers, so why act like it counts for so much now?
I think the lesson I've always taken from George is be bold and take risks. I think that the thing that George never did was maintain the status quo. And I think that that's really important because this business, especially now, things are changing so fast that you can't get stuck in doing the same thing. And I think that that's the exciting thing inside the Star Wars universe is, you know, we have this incredibly loyal fan base. We have an amazing amount of talent. And the worst thing we could do is to keep doing the same thing.
Buckle up because we are gonna play some devil's advocate. Kathleen Kennedy is not perfect. She may have worked closely with Spielberg and Lucas in their heyday, but I think she's the Tim Cook to their Steve Jobs. To her credit, she did try to channel Lucas's creative energy. When it came to the nuts and bolts of filmmaking, she sought out young, ambitious directors who could have easily been George Lucas's film school peers back in the day. It just didn't pan out. But it was a cool idea. It was similar to George's vision of what the saga could become years before. The book, How Star Wars Conquered the Universe, details that Lucas originally envisioned his world as a playground for other filmmakers to play around in. He did not want to be the gatekeeper of the universe. Kathleen Kennedy channeled that vision. Should she have instead chosen to concentrate creative authority into one person in the vein of Kevin Feige? Maybe, probably, yeah. It just happened to not work. And it just happened to not work because Kathleen Kennedy has something that George Lucas never did: a boss. For the first time ever, Lucasfilm was beholden to shareholder value, and as we see in every sector of the economy, shareholder value never translates to consumer value. When Kennedy wanted more time for The Force Awakens, Bob Iger said no. When she wanted more time for Episode 9, maybe even to split it in half, Bob Iger said no. Make no mistake, Kennedy understood the responsibility of ending the Skywalker saga right, especially after the death of Carrie Fisher. But I don't know, maybe Bob Iger wanted it all wrapped up before his retirement. You know, boost those Disney shares as much as possible. If you disagree with me on all that and still want George Lucas to ride in on a white horse and take back his company from the treacherous Kathleen Kennedy, understand this: Kathleen is his friend. If you spend your days calling her all sorts of horrible names and tearing her down as a person, do you think George is on your side? Is she the best studio executive in the world? Honestly, I don't know. But if you want to point to the number of projects under Kennedy that have not gone according to plan or not gotten off the ground or been canceled, as far as studio heads go, Kathleen Kennedy is kind of par for the course. This era of Star Wars leaves a lot to be desired, but if we're being honest with ourselves, It's had mixed approval ratings since 1983, maybe even 1980. Dissatisfaction is intrinsic to its DNA, maybe something that was inherited from the man who created it in the first place. He's never satisfied, and so neither are we, and that's not changed. It's a shame that George Lucas felt like he needed to sell his empire of dreams. I wish he could have just stepped down from the company and handed it off to someone with the same autonomy he enjoyed. But at the same time, I can't blame the man. $4 billion is $4 billion more than I'll ever have. At the end of the day, Lucas is gone and we're still here. And what do we do now? Well, hopefully we can broaden our perspective a little bit and recognize that lionizing Lucas while demonizing Disney's filmmakers may not be as cut and dried as we think. Lucas made a slew of mistakes over the course of his run, and we learned to welcome his efforts with grace. The least we can do is extend the same courtesy to his successors. A good first step is take control of our algorithm, because nothing good comes from letting that algorithm shape us. Whether it's cable news or YouTube personalities, the secret formula of success is out. Rage sells. And so always be aware of how the channels, podcasts, creators, all that make you feel. If someone makes a pattern out of making you angry, it's because they want something from you. That is the absolute truth. Whether it's your engagement, your money, your vote, whatever, the media machine knows how to get what it wants out of you. And in this climate of hyperinflation and desperation, it's only going to get worse. People are going to go where the most easy money is. And the easiest way to catch that money, frankly, is to over-exaggerate and be overly emotional. To subscribe responsibly to that end, some channels and podcasts I enjoy include So Uncivilized. Most of you might know this guy already. Just Right, Studio Binder, Like Stories of Old, and Savage Books. If you'd like to expand your vocabulary to better learn how to critique, these are for you. Like, instead of just saying the writing was bad, what made it bad? Or why are these characters flat? Or is it bad that these characters are flat? Mark Maxwell, I cannot recommend this channel enough. It focuses on gaming specifically, but the principles he covers are universal and awesome. It's a great way to learn how your brain works and how to make it work for you. What the Force? This podcast dives into the meta-textual facets of Star Wars. Rather than a simple, is this good or bad conversation, the hosts bring out new, deeper ways to look at these stories. All of these, to some extent, go beyond telling you what to think or how to feel, and instead try to teach you how to critically look at something for yourself and give voice to that. And at the end of the day, if we still feel intense burning anger toward a certain string of films or TV shows, we need to consider our actions. Acting out in haste and anger accomplishes nothing, at least nothing worthwhile. Yesterday's fandom was merciless, bitter, and entitled. It hated, among many things, the new things Lucas brought to the table, which was inevitable. The man was at a different point in his life by then and was not interested in recapturing the past. When it came time for Disney to reawaken the Force, what lessons did they take from that? The wrong ones by most measures. Episode 7 went to great lengths to mimic the magic of old Star Wars, but it was safe and acted like a counterweight to the prequel trilogy. If there's anything you can be sure of when it comes to corporations, it's this. They will always walk away with the wrong lessons. As Lucasfilm and Disney sift through the ever-increasing vitriol online, what sort of lessons do you think they'll take away from it? How is the toxic fandom of now ruining Star Wars for later? Star Wars' tragic flaw is how it inspires 12-year-olds with magic, only for those 12-year-olds to grow up and ruin the magic for the next batch of 12-year-olds, who in turn grow up, rinse, and repeat. You may look to examples of Hayden Christensen and Ahmed Best and Jake Lloyd and think, hey, the next generation of fans came along and now they shower them with admiration as they should have from the stars. Things worked out in the end, right? Well, no, those people still went through horrible times at the hands of the worst fans, and just because they're being love-bombed now doesn't mean that was okay. And we shouldn't settle for this pattern of super hating a person for a long time and waiting for the next generation of fans to come around and course correct. Instead, if you're filled with negative energy, turn it towards something productive. If you hate what you're being given, go out and make something better. Show Disney, show Lucasfilm what they're getting wrong. Write that novel or that screenplay, shoot that short film, compose that great musical score. That is the best way to honor the spirit of George Lucas. Hoping for Star Wars to give you back your childhood is irrational and unreasonable to demand of the filmmakers. They're only human, and they can't give you that. And if that's what you're always going for, you're never going to be satisfied. Don't settle for misery, because you, like the rest of us, deserve to feel fulfilled. I hope some of you stuck around till the end. I figured this would be a bit of a thorny topic, but I wanted to get it done, and sorry it took so long. I'm sure a lot of you have a lot of thoughts, so I won't leave a specific question for you to answer. If anything, include this, just so I know that you stuck around till the end. Fandom and its relationship to Star Wars and what negative critique is appropriate and what's not is a pretty messy question. I'm sure I had a lot of blind spots in my interpretation of the situation. Feel free to leave your takes in the comments below. For now, stay tough and stop by again sometime.